Yeah, I think we're good. Is Craig here? Is that okay?
Yeah. Okay, welcome everybody. Is this too loud? Is that okay? Good, excellent. So yeah, welcome. My name is Dr. Christine Simmons-Moore. I'm a professor of psychology here at UWG, and it's my great pleasure to welcome everyone here to the second lecture in our Bill Roll lecture series this fall. For those of you who missed the lecture last week, we recorded it, and it will be available on the Bill Roll website very soon. It's currently on YouTube. We're going to put the link up ASAP. We are really fortunate to be hosting 2 lectures this year. Tonight, we're excited to be hosting Dr. Hennacy for our in-person lecture. As many of you are aware, Dr. Hennacy is the scientist behind the very popular podcast, the Telepathy Tapes, which has really drawn a lot of public attention to the field of parapsychology, and the topic of telepathy in particular. Her work certainly dovetails with my own, and I'm excited to hear what she has to say tonight. My colleague, Dr. Glazier, will be formally introducing Dr. Hennacy a little later this evening. As we did last week, we're going to begin our evening by remembering Dr. Bill Roll. Our lecture series is named in honour of Dr. William Roll, who passed away in 2012. That same year, we held the inaugural Bill Roll lecture, which I initiated. Since that time, we've invited key researchers in parapsychology and consciousness studies from around the world to present a lecture designed for the university community and interested members of the public. The purpose of our lecture series is to remember Dr. Roll and also to draw public attention to the importance of the academic discipline of parapsychology. As I explained last week, this is an area of psychology that engages in the scientific and critical study of a range of what we call exceptional human experiences that are challenging according to mainstream assumptions about how consciousness works. Experiences include extrasensory perception, anomalous mind-matter interactions, and experiences that suggest that consciousness may be possible without the physical body, even just for a short time. Dr. Hennacy's work has explored many of these experiences, including telepathy, in which there appears to be some form of communication, anomalous communication, between people. Parapsychologists study these types of experiences from multiple perspectives, including field research, laboratory experiments, surveys, and studies that explore people's experiences and how they make sense of them. Parapsychological experiences like telepathy are deeply human and are reported in every culture as well as across history. It is important for psychologists to try to understand them, even if many of them turn out to have a normal explanation. Dr. Bill Roll was a well-known parapsychology researcher. He was born in Bremen in Germany. Oh. And sorry about that. Dr. Roll had a lifelong interest in consciousness and exceptional human experiences. People are joining. We're very popular. His interests in parapsychology were inspired by having an out-of-body experience at the age of 16. His academic journey took him to Oxford University in the UK, and then later to the US, where he worked at the Duke Parapsychology Lab in Durham, North Carolina, before directing the Psychical Research Foundation. Dr. Roll was here on the psychology faculty of UWG in the early 1980s, until his retirement in 2008. He is well known for his systematic research into haunting and poltergeist cases, including the Seaford and Columbus cases. He is survived by his wife Lydia and his children Lise, Leaf, Bill, and his grandchildren. And I think we may have some of his family members joining us tonight online. Within the psychology program at UWG, we are continuing to explore these fascinating human experiences. This is happening in the classroom, where parapsychology is taught at undergraduate, master's, and the doctoral level. We also have a healthy research agenda that is run through our Exceptional Experiences Research Group, or EERL. This lab includes several faculty, including Dr. Glazier, in addition to Dr. Mitchell, who is at CIIS, and he's in the room, alongside undergraduate and graduate students, many of whom are here tonight. I will say a little bit more about a couple of our current projects. Last Tuesday, we officially launched our Wind phone. This is a phone booth housing a phone that is not connected to any telephone lines. Wind phones are designed to allow people to connect with their deceased loved ones. The Wind phone is open to everyone in the campus and local community, and we hope that it is helpful to those who have lost loved ones. And it's located in Malson Hall by the elevator. We also plan to explore what experiences with deceased loved ones are like and which factors correlate with them. We're also currently working with an international team to explore precognition. We're actively seeking participants for this study and invite you to complete our screening measure to see if you qualify. Flyers are located outside the lecture hall, and you can also add your name to our participant sign-up sheet for other studies as well. We're currently finishing up a project on ecological consciousness and ESP, and have explored psychometry, local folklore, and aphantasia, which is a lack of visual mental imagery, and how that relates to exceptional experiences. We welcome donations to help us to do more research like this and to be able to host more events like this one. UWG also has a highly unique collection of materials, including many about consciousness and exceptional human experiences, housed within the UWG Library archives. This includes the Bill Roll collection. The UWG Library is co-sponsoring the Bill Roll Lecture Series with Psychology this fall. And at this time, I would now like to introduce our colleague, Craig Schroer, who will share a few words about special collections and the Human Consciousness Collection at UWG.
Try not to make too much noise with that, moving the microphone around here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Craig Schroer. I'm a librarian at UWG's Ingram Library, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this year's Bill Roll Lecture, an event that we in Ingram Library are honored to participate in. I'm delighted to see all of tonight's participants and attendees, and especially excited to hear this evening's speaker, Dr. Diane Hennacy. The psychology department at the University of West Georgia has the distinction of being one of the earliest academic programs in the United States to focus on humanistic psychology and parapsychology. Ingram Library's Special Collections is proud to support this focus through our extensive holdings of rare books and archival collections that not only preserve the legacy of groundbreaking scholars, but also continue to inspire new research and inquiry. These human consciousness collections, primarily spanning the 1970s to the present, showcase thematic strengths in extrasensory perception, remote viewing, psychokinesis, near-death and out-of-body experiences, astrology, cosmic art, and more. Among our most notable collections are, of course, the papers of Dr. William G. Roll, whose work in psychokinesis helped shape the field and who served on the faculty of West Georgia College, i.e. UWG. Ingo Swann, who among many notable accomplishments, coined the term remote viewing. Dr. Stanley Krippner, a pioneer in consciousness studies. We also hold the David Wayne Hooks Library from the Psychical Research Foundation and the papers of Sidney Girard and Carmi Harari, both foundational figures in humanistic psychology. Other noteworthy collections include that of Janet Lee Mitchell, known for experiments in ESP and psychokinesis, Anne C. Richards, who's here, who explored humanistic education and student attitudes towards sexuality, and Edith Weisskopf Jolson, whose research addressed schizophrenia as well as alienation and logotherapy. Through our stewardship of these research collections, we aim to ensure their long-term accessibility to you and future generations. Ingram Library is proud of our long-standing relationship with UWG's psychology department and thrilled to be part of this annual lecture series honoring Dr. Roll's legacy. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Craig, for that lovely overview of Ingram Library's special collections. Good evening. My name is Dr. Jacob Glazier. I'm an assistant professor of psychology here at the University of West Georgia. I am honored to introduce our esteemed speaker this evening, Dr. Diane Hennacy, who will deliver the Fall 2025 Bill Roll Lecture in Parapsychology. Dr. Hennacy will guide us into the remarkable world of autistic savants in synesthetic perception, domains where extraordinary abilities emerge in ways that challenge conventional neuroscience and stretch our understanding of consciousness. Drawing from compelling case studies and emerging theoretical frames, Dr. Hennacy explores the possibility that these individuals may perceive aspects of reality typically filtered out by the neurotypical brain. This evening's talk, Perception Beyond the Interface, Savants, Synesthesia, and the Fabric of Reality, will consider whether our everyday experience is only a carefully constructed interface to a deeper informational world. Along the way, we will encounter questions at the frontier of science and philosophy. What is the nature of consciousness? What do anomalous forms of cognition reveal about the brain's perceptual architecture? And are there hidden layers of reality accessible only to those whose minds diverge from our neurotypical norms? I have a few preparatory notes before I introduce our speaker. The Q&A session will be roughly 10 to 15 minutes long and will aim to end around 8 to 8:15. Virtual attendance members, please do not use the chat feature during the lecture and only during the Q&A at the end. In addition, we have set up a foundation fund to support this event in parapsychological research at the University of West Georgia. We would greatly welcome any assistance you can provide. Please consider donating. Instructions to do so can be found on the UWG Bill Roll Lecture webpage. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Diane Hennacy, an internationally recognized expert on autism and savant syndrome who trained in neuroscience at Ohio State University. She received her MD and psychiatric training at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine before spending 6 months at the Institute of Psychiatry in London doing child psychiatry with Sir Michael Rutter in 1987. She was on faculty at Harvard Medical School, is serving for the 3rd time on the board of the Parapsychological Association, and has contributed chapters to AAPS Is Consciousness Primary and the Oxford University Handbook of Psychology and Spirituality. Her 2008 book, The ESP Enigma, received an award from the LA Festival of Books and has been translated into German, Portuguese, and Finnish. Her experimental research for the past 13 years has focused on autistic children who reportedly exhibit anomalous cognition and was featured in the popular podcast, The Telepathy Tapes. For the past 20 years, she has also been working towards a theory of consciousness that has led her to a radical theory for brain functioning that is grounded in cutting-edge science and will be the subject of her next book. Without further ado, please join me in extending a warm and heartfelt welcome to Dr. Diane Hennacy.
Can you hear me? All right, great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. It's really an honor to be here. And I want to thank Dr. Christine Simmons-Moore and Dr. Jacob Glazer for inviting me. This has really been a lifelong journey. And let me just start with giving you just a tiny little background about me that to give you some context. I was raised in a family in which I was playing with science kits when I was 4 years old. My father was a scientist with graduate degrees in 3 different branches of science. And I was fascinated particularly by behavior. And studied neuroscience because I wanted to know how that behavior mapped to the brain. But I realized it was really human consciousness that interested me the most, which is the reason why I went on to medical school, originally with the intention of being a neurosurgeon. And And it was the phenomenology that I found out about in neuropsychiatry that turned me on more than anything else. And particularly what turned me on was meeting Oliver Sacks in 1986, shortly after his book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And he told about these two institutionalized identical autistic twins who, this was back in the 60s, who they couldn't function at all. That's why they were institutionalized. And yet they played these games. One of the games they played was to recite to one another prime numbers that were consecutive. And they would just say them back and forth to one another like they were tossing a volleyball back and forth. And Oliver Sacks was able to validate that these were prime numbers, which are numbers that are only divisible by themselves in one, up to 12 digits. And these two boys could do it to 20 digits, but the computers at the time, that exceeded the computational system at the time. So he couldn't validate it that far. And because mathematics was my first love, I knew that there was no good algorithm for calculating primes. And I thought, how are they doing this? Another thing they did, which is a common savant skill, is that if you told them any date in the past or the future, going thousands of years, they could tell you whether it was a Tuesday, a Friday, a Saturday, or whatever. They could name the day of the week it was. Once again, there's no really good algorithm for calculating calendar dates, but you can do it. I had an algorithm that my father had come up with, but a graduate student in math with a calculator couldn't give you the answer as quickly as these boys could. And what really blew me away was that what they said was they saw the answers. They didn't derive the answers. The answers appeared to them out here in this physical space, what we think of as physical reality. That's where they saw it, and they just would read them off. Daniel Tammet is a famous autistic savant who has synesthesia, and one of his gifts is that he can recite over 22,000 digits of pi. And he can do this effortlessly. And how he says that he does it is that he just sees out here, he sees this ticker tape like parade of different colored shapes, and he just reads it off. So one of the things that I found so interesting is that why were these autistic savants so attracted to things like prime numbers? Why are they attracted to pi? Because I've run into this with a lot of the ones that I've gone to do research on my own. Like, oh, I'm testing them for telepathy, and it's like, oh yeah, and he can recite pi to, 200 digits or whatever. And I'm like, or he can do calendar calculation. So it's like, what is it about that? Why is that so fascinating to them? And one of the things about the number pi is that it's not only an infinite number that never repeats itself, but it really can only be understood as something that it's a constant that comes from a relationship. It's the relationship between the diameter of a circle and the circumference of the circle. Pi, you'll see pi over there, and that colored figure there, that is pi. Where you're taking each one of those threads is connecting the different digits. So it actually forms a beautiful geometric shape. Similarly, prime numbers form these spiral shapes. If you graph them out, you'll see that you could actually know what the consecutive prime numbers would be if you move around those spirals. Similarly, what's interesting is the periodic table. The periodic table, I see this here posted here in this lecture hall. Periodic table came to Mendeleev in a dream. People were trying to figure out how all these different elements that had these different physical properties might relate to one another. And that's where the periodic table came from. What's interesting is that the periodic table makes more sense if you arrange it in the shape of a spiral. So over and over again, these spirals are showing up. Jason Padgett is someone who was an ordinary person. I think he was an insurance or a furniture salesman. And one day he was coming back from a karaoke bar and he was beaten to a pulp. And ever since then, he's had post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, but he also is now a brilliant mathematician and he sees fractals. One of the most common fractals that you'll see in nature comes from something called the Fibonacci sequence. And so this is where the spiral comes from. How you get the Fibonacci sequence is that you add numbers together, so that you add a number with the number that just preceded it, and then you create a progression of numbers. So 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 2 = 3, 2 + 3 = 5, 3 + 5 = 8, 5 + 8, and so on. Well, if you plot it out in a graph, you get the spiral. Another thing about the Fibonacci sequence is if you create a ratio between each one of these numbers with the one that comes after it, so 5 to 3, 8 to 5, 13 to 8, what you get is you get the gold ratio. You get phi. That's another one of these magical numbers that never repeats itself and is better described as a spiral. Now, why am I telling you all of this? I'm telling you all of this because what I've been trying to understand is these synesthetic savants are somehow seeing the code of nature. They're seeing at that level of reality. And what I've been fascinated by ever since I learned about those autistic individuals who are institutionalized is that the question of where does information reside? If you have someone like Daniel Tammet who can effortlessly give you 22,000 plus digits of pi, and he says he just reads it out, where is that information? Because as a neuroscientist, I was taught that, it somehow information is stored in the wiring in the brain. Now, if you take two different, pick the two spirals that you see from the Fibonacci sequence, and you're basically taking two of them and putting them together, you get these double spirals. And in the middle, you see a symbol that looks a lot like the yin yang. And you'll see in nature, you'll see these double spirals over and over and over again. And you see it at the micro level, and you see it at the macro level. You see these spiral galaxies. You also see the golden ratio in us. In fact, so this drawing here is a famous drawing that's showing you how we line up. Like if you were to take the proportions of a man and put us in a circle. And this other drawing is showing you that if you take all of the bones in our skeleton, our fingers compared to our forearm compared to, and so on, what you see is that they all fall into that golden ratio. And similarly, DNA itself the ratio between the length between the twists of the double helix and the width of it is the golden ratio. You also see the Fibonacci sequence in music. And you see it in light. The ratio of the frequencies of the different colors in the visible spectrum. So, in addition to my interest in parapsychology and neuroscience, I've been interested in ancient wisdom traditions. And one of the things that I've been doing is I've been working alongside Rex Sinaj, who is an incredibly psychic person himself. He gets downloads of information. And one of the things that he figured out was there was this carving. It was an arborglyph, a carving that he found in a tree in Southern California. And it was so important to the indigenous people who lived there, and it was on the north side of the tree. It was so important to them that they kept carving through the moss to keep that carving alive. And he decoded what it was. And that stone that he is standing in front of, it's called the flat stone. And it's pointed to the North Star. And it's perfectly level. It's a massive structure so that nothing's going to make that thing move. With all of the size of the stones and the amount of mortar that's in it. And what he discovered was that the symbol that was carved on this tree is the symbol that is created by the shadow of the sun over a calendar year. And the indigenous people would look at, and it looks a lot like that Pisces symbol there, only turned 90 degrees. And so what you have is the summer solstice is the summer solstice is is one of those semicircles, and then the winter solstice is the other. And and then there's a line in the full version of it. There's a line along the middle, and that line along the middle is not directly in between those two semicircles. It's closer to the one that's on the right. Well, that symbol is the symbol that you find. That's an image you find inside of a vortex. But it's also, if you were to lay a newborn on the flat stone, you'll find that all of the proportions of it, including where the line goes across the middle at the equinox, that lines up with the belly button. And so he was saying, I don't know quite what to make of this, but somehow there's a relationship between this image that I see that the sun makes over the course of a calendar year and the image on the flat stone and feet and the proportions in the body. And I noticed it's that same symbol that you see in the Berber language up above there. And that language, that symbol means free man. And it refers to themselves. And this is a picture of Ramses, who I met when he was 5 years old. And he has a condition called hyperlexia. And that's where you learn to read precociously. He started reading when he was 4 months old. By the time he was 2 years old, he could read 8 languages, including Japanese, Russian, Hebrew, Arabic, Spanish, English. And I went to visit him, and those are some of the symbols where I'm asking him, I'm checking out his knowledge of these different languages. He could read the college level astronomy book when I met him. And he was also telepathic with his mother, who is a brilliant surrealist artist who has her own psychic abilities, and those are some of her paintings in the background. And he was able to speak. So I was able to do telepathy experiments with him verbally. And when he's fascinated by pi, he would recite all of these digits of pi, and he has synesthesia. Well, he sees auras around people, he sees auras around animals and plants, colors have, numbers have colors associated with them, and so on. Highly gifted individual. And so one of the reasons why I started doing research, besides being fascinated by savants, one of the reasons why I started doing research with these individuals and thinking that they might be able to show ESP if anybody's going to, is that I saw how similar savant syndrome was to ESP. But I also knew that in the waking state, the brain functionality of autistic individuals is similar to the brain functionality when we're in dreaming sleep. And that a lot of people who never otherwise have psychic experiences have had an experience that's precognitive or telepathic, or know somebody, who died in their dreaming sleep. And I believe that I saw that as a clue. And what you have in dreaming sleep is the right hemisphere is more dominant than the left, and the frontal lobes are less active. That describes an autistic child. And when you enter into their world and find out more about what it's like, it's very dreamlike. It's like they're in this hybrid reality, a dual reality that's both that dreamscape in addition to this, what we think of as this consensual reality. I have one individual who is highly functional and can speak, who contacted me recently, who says that he can create a split screen and have the dreamscape in one half of his reality, in his visual field, and the other consensual in the consensual reality in the other one. And what's interesting is that it's his left visual field where he has the dreamscape, and that corresponds with the right hemisphere. And part of how he knows when the dreamscape has clicked on is that he created these little, he has it populated by little mice characters that he dresses up in outfits and has them do all kind of like Beatrice Potter. and so when the mice show up, he knows that he's got that screen going. And then what he can do is that he can use his imagination to solve an engineering problem or something else, and he can do it in real time there. Just like Nikola Tesla would solve all kinds of engineering riddles or whatever, and design things in his mind's eye, only he experienced it not inside, but out here, and he would actually design it in his mind before he would then execute it. That brings up one of the points I also wanted to say before I go on to Pete about synesthesia that's so fascinating to me, is that some people have a form that's called projective synesthesia, where they experience the association, this blending of senses or blending of a sense with a symbol. They experience it out here, and for others, it's what's called an associative process, and they're experiencing it as an interior process. And that made me think about how, for us, our thoughts are, we think of them as a private interior process. So that's kind of more like the associative synesthesia. But the experience of it outside, that's more like what people would label hallucinations. If somebody tells me I hear my thoughts out loud, or I'm broadcasting my thoughts, or they're having, they're seeing things that other people didn't see, it is interpreted as their own mind is somehow projecting its contents onto this, and which is part of why I talk about this being a simulation of reality. My first aha moment about that sort of simulation was thinking about the blind spot. And where the optic nerve leaves the back of our eye, we should have black holes there. But instead, what happens is that the brain fills in that space with what it predicts should be there. And that's why we can get literally, blindsided by having something come out from our blind spot, because we didn't see it, because it wasn't part of the brain's computational process to create this interface for us to interact with. Now, Tim Peake, what's interesting about him, he is the savant. He's not really autistic. He was the savant that Rain Man was modeled after. And what makes him so remarkable is his memory. He could, by the time he died in his late 50s, he had over 12,000 books memorized word for word. And he could recite them forwards and backwards, word for word. In addition to many other things, he could tell you how to get from any two cities to, he had all these maps memorized. And he could read two books simultaneously, one with each eye. So he has this sort of split screen, just like this other person that I know. And if you look at his brain, what you see is, so that's a normal brain, and this is Tim Peake's brain. And what you see is that sort of white, semicircular structure that's central. That's the corpus callosum, and that is a brand of axons that connects the left and the right hemisphere. He's totally missing that. In fact, he has this huge, the black here, this is it's like a hole in his brain. And because he had a condition called hydrocephalus. And what that is a buildup of the cerebral spinal fluid in the brain, that there's something that's blocking it, so that you get a buildup of intracranial pressure, which then causes not only this extra fluid in the brain, but it also caused him to have such a heady head, because his skull, when you're first born, it's not fused together, and so it can expand. And his head was so heavy, he couldn't hold his head upright. That's why you see him tilting like that. Now, I started to wonder, now, if memory really is about that it's supposed to be the synaptic connections between neurons that hold the memories, then how could somebody who has such a disconnected brain have such an amazing memory? And then I learned about the research of John Lorber, who was a neurologist in England. And he was studying people with severe hydrocephalus, in fact, more severe than that of Tim Peake. So this is what a normal brain looks like. You can see these black structures here. That's what your ventricles should look like. This is what they are like. This is all fluid. So there's barely any brain tissue. Okay, barely any. This is all just fluid. Barely any brain tissue. He studied 600 cases like this, and only half of them had an IQ below 100. In fact, one of them had an IQ of 130. And I was like, okay, that is crazy. And this was published in Science. And it's like, but it's been ignored because people haven't known what to do with it. Well, what I did with it was I said, well, wait a minute. Okay, obviously, memory is not, the source of memory is not those neuronal connections. It's somewhere else. However, what is the minimal unit that we need in order to basically access information? And so that brings me to, this, I became very familiar with work by Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrode. Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist at the University of Arizona, who says he thinks that microtubules are the major processing unit in the brain. And these ventricles are lined with cilia that have arrays of microtubules in them. And so I believe that he's right, that the microtubules are a very, very important part of how the brain processes information. And I go into that more detail in my book. And this just shows you a little bit about, you know, the ventricles themselves and how important they are, because they come from, when you have a developing embryo, the neurotube is formed by by it folding over on itself, and it encloses the amniotic fluid that's in the amniotic sac. And this shows you that in a 13-week fetus, the peak down below is what the ventricles look like, and the gray above, that's what the brain looks like. You can see that during development, the ventricles actually are a large, that comprise a large part of the brain. And we know from more recent work, I mean, this is several years old now, but for doing research on memory, where you take a caterpillar and you teach it, you pair something of one stimulus, you know, say a light, you know, with, you know, something obnoxious, that, and then you've taught that caterpillar to avoid, okay, you know, light, to be, you know, to have a response to that. Well, when the caterpillar goes into the chrysalis to turn into a butterfly, the brain, the nervous system of the caterpillar totally melts and turns into this goo. You do not have these neuronal connections with one another. You have something called imaginal cells. And so in testing the butterfly, when the butterfly comes out of the chrysalis, it retains the memory. So once again, everything keeps pointing to where we think information is stored, and how we think about memory has to be changed. And why do we even have brains in the first place? There is a species of tunicate that only grows a brain when it needs to navigate. And it actually, this is not that species. I don't have a picture of them right now, but it actually looks kind of like a little miniature brain like ours. And they only grow it when they navigate, and then they go, once they figure out, you know, where they want to be, then, and set up housekeeping, the brain dissolves and they get rid of it. Navigation is so critical that people who are born blind, like Daniel Quiche, they can learn how to navigate through an alternative route. And how he did it is that he emits sounds, and his brain maps out the information that comes from them bouncing off of things in his environment. And he can climb mountains, he can ride a bike, and he says it's all through the echolocation. And what we know is that what happens is that you, during early development, if you're not using your visual cortex, it will get incorporated into some other function. And so what happens is that we know that he is in his echolocating, he's using his visual cortex. It's just that he doesn't have the capacity to see. And we know that we have a GPS system in the brain that, you know, people receive the Nobel Prize for that. And so we have this sense of, in that we have grid cells where we know where we create a map of our environment, and we know where we are in it, you know, through this whole process. Robin Baker is a British psychologist who was doing this research decades ago where he was taking college students and he was blindfolding them to see if they could figure out how to make their way home. And they could, with extremely, extreme accuracy. But what happened is if you put a magnet on top of their head, they couldn't do it. So why would that be? Well, the Earth has this electromagnetic field around it. And there are a lot of species that use that electromagnetic field to navigate. In fact, we now know that birds will, when they're migrating, that they will use the direction, because of its curvature, that the angle of that curvature is always shifting. They will use that perception of the angle of that magnetic field to help them know where they are. And we have receptors in the back of our eye that can perceive magnetic fields. We don't know what we use them for, but those receptors are there. And I can tell you, I've been studying biology long enough to know that nothing is accidental. Everything that's there is there and has a function. We just haven't discovered it yet. So we have within us, and so do creatures even as simple as this, bacteria. We have something called magnetite, and magnetite is just basically a compound that's made out of iron and sulfur and oxygen that acts like a compass. And so this bacteria knows up from down because those little black inclusions in it contain magnetite. We have magnetite in our skulls. So we have it in our nasal bone. We have it in the sphenoid, which is at the base of our skull, and it's the only cranial bone that touches all of the other cranial bones. And I bring that up because magnetite can not only, in one form, it acts like a compass and can give alignment. And in another form, it can be shielding. It depends upon whether it is that there's two types of magnetite. So I bring this up because what I started looking at is looking at the brain, which contains magnetite, more concentrated in certain areas than others, and the membranous sacs that the brain is contained in, they contain magnetite. And looking at it in terms of that we are electromagnetic organisms, we're in a resonance with the electromagnetic field of this planet and beyond. And I started looking into the research of a woman named Shafika Harugla, who is also a neuropsychiatrist who worked with Wilder Penfield in Canada. And she had these very, very gifted individuals that could do things like see energy fields around people. They also could make medical diagnoses based on what they saw in people's energy fields, highly accurately. She would have them do a reading, and then she'd find out what the medical record showed. And there was this one person that she studied, who she gave the pseudonym Diane, who could tell you, you could take a bar magnet, it could be across the room, she could tell you which was the North and which was the South Pole. And when asked how she did it, she said that the North Pole was always blue and the South Pole was always red. So she just saw this color glowing out of, the two ends of the magnet. And this brings me back to these synesthetic autistic individuals I work with, because they're seeing these kinds of relationships as well. Interestingly, if you go to esoteric sciences, what you see is that they describe this rainbow of colors along the spine. And that red is always the root chakra down there at the base. And the third eye chakra, the forehead, is blue. And we have that fluid that I showed you that is so prominent in the people with hydrocephalus. That fluid also exists along the center of the spinal column. It's as though the light is getting broken down into its different frequencies as you go up that canal of water, and that these individuals there have been people across the world from different cultures who have described the same thing. The chakras along the spinal column that have those colors. And Phi, which is the symbol over there, that symbol is actually the symbol for the golden ratio that I mentioned earlier, but it also looks a lot like these toroidal biofields that have been described by psychic people as existing around and within us. And I bring those up because I believe that the information is in our biofield. And our brain is reading the biofield. That biofield has both local and non-local information. And the biofield is not just electromagnetic, it's also got something called plasma. And plasma is it's called the fourth state of matter. It's an ionized gas, so it's like electrons that have this negative charge, or particles that have a positive charge, but it acts differently than a gas. And one of the things that's different is gases tend to disperse, but plasma, even though you have all of these electrons that should be repelling one another because they're all negatively charged, they act as though they are all one organism. And plasma tends to form these toroidal structures, which is how the biofield is described. And plasma also forms filaments. And if you look at the nervous system and the connection between the neurons, it looks a lot like the cosmic web that we see. And plasma is 99% of everything is plasma. It's the most common form of matter. It's just that it's oftentimes not visible. In plasma, plasma is what we have in lightning. And there are, besides, I mentioned earlier, Jason Padgett, who was beaten up and all of a sudden had these savant skills. Similarly, being hit by lightning can make you a savant. And in fact, in the Lakota Sioux, if you're struck by lightning and survive it 3 times, you're automatically a medicine man. You're automatically considered psychically gifted. And people report that they are. This was Tony Sikora, who was a orthopedic surgeon who was, at a pay booth during a storm, and when he's hanging it up, he got hit by lightning. And he was lucky that the person who was waiting to use the pay phone after him was a nurse who helped him to recover. And after that, he just became obsessed with composing music. And in fact, his best-known song is the Lightning Sonata. So toroids, you can see them, that shape in nature. And so one of the things that you will see, the shape of an apple, that you can see, the toroidal shape there. What's interesting is that if you if you slice an apple this way instead of, from top to bottom, you see this 5-pointed star. And I showed this image here, which from, esoteric traditions of the pentagram between these two crescents, because I believe that these ancient symbols were telling us about the nature of how reality is constructed. And so, go back to when I was saying that golden ratio is expressed in us, okay, and that relates to a vortex. Well, the Taurus has a vortex right in the middle. And we have 4 limbs and a head. That's like the 5-pointed star. We also have 5 fingers on each one of our hands and our feet. I don't think it's all coincidence. Now, this is Bob Greenire there with Randall Carlson, and he's showing a demonstration of creating something called Volcaeosoliton. And basically, what he's showing you is that if you take a plate and you stick it in a pool of water and just gently move it, you automatically create 2 vortices. And these vortices are spinning in opposite directions. One spinning clockwise, the other spinning counterclockwise. And they're connected to one another. Now, why is that important? Well, what I realized is that in order to understand all of these spirals that keep showing up in the sort of the blueprint for reality, that it really is it's coming from the fact that everything is spinning. And information is, if you take all of these waveforms that are created because of the nature that everything is spinning, and you look at the interference between those different waveforms, that's how information can be encoded in the system. We live in a sea of information encoded in waveforms that are both vibrational and light, electromagnetic. And our brains are reading that. And I believe that this is part of the symbol of the symbol of Pisces and the 2 fish, or the symbol of the yin yang. Each one of these symbols is really telling us about this nature of reality. In fact, it also relates to black holes and white holes. And you can see from this tortoise over here, you can see how there's a white hole and a black hole contained within the torus. So what does this have to do, with ESP? I want to tell you a story about this carved stone here. This is a carved stone from Scotland, and it was sent to me by the mother of one of these non-speaking autistic children who's extremely psychic, and she herself has some psychic abilities. And she sent me that picture without any explanation, but she sent it to me. And then the next day, less than 24 hours later, this woman, and that woman lives in Tennessee, this woman who is autistic, who lives in England, sends me the same stone. Has no idea the other woman had sent it to me. And she's somebody who has these dreams at night where she says that she's decoding, she believes she was a Celtic druid in the past life, and that she's decoding this information. And so she sent it to me as well. I took that as basically a sign that I needed to understand this stone. I needed to try to understand what the symbolism is here. And the woman the second woman, the one who lives in England, who sent me this picture of the stone, she was somebody who first contacted me 2 months after I had gone to Ohio to Serpent Mound. How many of you know Serpent Mound? I mean, Serpent Mound is this, it's in southern Ohio, and there's this, it was built by the indigenous people who lived here thousands of years ago. And it looks like a serpent with these really very distinctive sort of humps in the shape. And it's got this jaw that's wide open like this, and it's got an egg, in between the jaw. Well, I had just gotten back from Serpent Mound, and I didn't tell anybody I was going to Serpent Mound. I'd just gotten back from Serpent Mound, and this woman in England contacted me the first time, and she said, "I'm going to show you some of my artwork." And she said, "I'm an autistic, savant." She painted a painting that looked like Serpent Mound, the same exact shape, only instead of it being an egg in the jaw, it was a pyramid. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. She's sending that to me right after I'd gotten back from Serpent Mound. Well, so I thought there's some kind of connection between her and I. And so one night I had a dream in which I decoded this symbol. And the next morning, she sent me an email saying, I decoded the symbol. And it was 6 months later. And what I want you to take a look at is in this symbol, do you see this structure here? That looks to me like a moon. And this looks like the glyph for the sun. And up here looks like the snake. And what I realized was that there are all of these esoteric traditions that talk about there being these two energies. Okay, so this is the caduceus. And you see these two snakes that are spiraling up the caduceus. Well, this is associated with Kundalini rising, okay, in these esoteric traditions. And what I realized, and they talk about how once you get a harmony between the left and the right, between the lunar and the solar energy, you get Kundalini rising. And I think that that's what this symbol represents, is the moon and the sun coming together, and the snake, which is how Kundalini is depicted, it rising. And this is, I have people right now contacting me from all over the world telling me they're having these Kundalini experiences. And what I mean by that is they experience these energy shifts going up and down their spine. They start vibrating, and they start developing psychic abilities as a result. Von Swanson is a physicist who came up with this theory in which he talks about torsion being an important force. And torsion is this force that has to do with spin. And it has very, very different characteristics depending upon whether or not it is left-handed spin or right-handed spin. And so in the ancient tradition, Ida, okay, which is one of those snakes going along that caduceus, Ida is basically the same as how he describes left-handed torsion. And that's what embodies intuition, inner awareness, the cooling flow of lunar consciousness. Whereas Pingala mirrors right-handed torsion, expressing outer action logic and the heat of the solar will. And What's interesting is that the left hemisphere of the brain is associated with this. The left hemisphere is associated with the right-handed portion and vice versa. And he talked about how if these two torsion forces that are in opposite spins, if they harmonize, that you also get the shift in consciousness. And I think that that's what's happening to a lot of people right now, is there's some energetic shifts that are occurring. If you look at, this is a view of the brain. If you look at the brain, what you'll see is that these are the ventricles in the center here, these black areas. They look a lot like that, the caduceus with the two wings off to the side. And located in that fourth ventricle is where we have the pineal gland, right in here, which has been long associated with psychic abilities. And if we go back, believe that this is the pineal gland. And I think you can even see in the symbol for psi an allusion to that. So one of the things that Rex St. Ange, the Native American that I've been working with, says is that the elders in these archives that we've been working with, they talk about a time when before people's fontanelles closed. In other words, that they were more psychic before the bone in their skull all knitted together. Which brings me back to Kim Peek, who, because of his hydrocephalus, his bones never knitted together. He has gaps in them. Similarly, babies have this soft spot where their skull has not knitted together. You can better see it here. And why is this important? Is because if we look at the pineal gland, which is part of this, I have this system that I talk about in the book that I'm writing that's coming out next year. The pineal gland, which was identified by Ed Casey and also by Eastern mystics as playing a huge role in this third sight, the second sight. This is the third eye, second sight. The pineal actually evolved from an eye. In fact, there are lizards that still have an eye on top of their head. And what happened is that in the evolution going from reptile to mammal, and the introduction of the limbic system, which is involved in nurturing and bonding and all these social behaviors, it got very deeper and deeper, but it still has properties that are properties where it responds to electromagnetic fields. It's still got properties that are sensitive to light. And so I really do think that all of this is pointing us to the idea that information is contained within these toroidal biofields. And what we're doing, as shown by this picture by Alex Gray, of somebody who, the images that he obtained when he was under the influence of psychedelics, that you can see that sort of toroidal, coming out, big vortex coming right out of his crown chakra. And I think that what it's showing us is that information is really, that the information is around us and within us. Like the torus itself is very similar to a Mobius strip, mathematically. And what's important about a Mobius strip is that even though it looks like this, it looks kind of like the infinity symbol. It's where if you take a strip of paper and you just put one twist in it and then put it back together, the inside and the outside are one and the same. If you run your finger along the inside of it, you'll eventually end up on the outside of it, and then you'll keep going back in. It keeps looping around. And so this idea that our inner world and our outer world are separate is an illusion. And that's what I think these synesthetes are showing us as well. They're showing us that you know, oh, you can be having that process as an inner process, or you can be having that process as an exterior process. Similarly, that's what these autistic individuals are telling us. And I'll leave with the symbol Om, which is the sacred sound. And the symbol itself is meant to represent that this is our waking consciousness, big part of what we experience. This is our dreaming consciousness. This represents deep sleep. This represents Maya, okay, the illusion. And this represents pure consciousness. And I thought it was very interesting how this sort of makes me think of like the crown chakra here, almost by the shape of it. And it's like, okay, this is like the closing of the fontanelle, you know, separating us from access to true source and pure consciousness and the true reality. Anyway, thank you.
Questions, I think. People in the online room, if you want to put your questions into the chat, but we can take a few questions in the room. Anyone has questions or comments? Nikki?
Yeah.
We just need to have a mic.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the presentation, and thank you for what you've done to bring awareness to these issues. Question that I had, and I'm eager to read your book. So I was curious about what you've looked into potentially in terms of excitation inhibition balance. So, you know, autistic individuals tend to lean more and more excitation than neurotypicals. Critical brain hypothesis. Excitation inhibition balance is a control parameter for that, and it's been linked to altered states and accessing information that would ordinarily be filtered out of awareness, and or Bayesian predictive coding, and that autistic individuals tend to give low weight to raw sensory data and top-down prediction, which filters out neural noise, which some of this stuff. I don't know. Feel free to.
Wow, okay, there's a lot of questions there. Well, first of all, I mean, they have a shortage of what are called GABAergic neurons. And GABAergic neurons are the kind of the brakes, okay, and they have more of the excitatory neurons, and that correlates with an increase in anomalous perception. So yeah, they've got, you know, kind of like these runaway brains, you know, and they're really processing, you know, at a fast speed and not feel very much at all. And what was the second one?
So that would actually match critical brain hypothesis. It's like runaway states. Yeah, they're more subcritical than normal. And then the third thing was Bayesian predictive coding. So this would actually match what you said about the simulation that we're all projecting out. We use kind of top-down predictive. We impose that.
Right, and they have less of that. They have less of that. Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Are you familiar with Serena Roney-Dougal's work and David Luke? They have been looking at the pineal gland and melatonin, and Serena's work particularly looks at the chakra system and how it might map onto the nervous system. And so a lot of her work sort of ties these things together, but she looks at meditation and psi. She's found lots of evidence for meditation and psi. So yeah, it might be something that you might want to.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
she's in England. Has the Psi Centre in Glastonbury.
Yeah, yeah, I'm very, very interested in looking at, well, I'm very interested in looking at the biofield. And, some of the most profound data I got was looking at the biofield with a device that measures the photonic discharge off of our fingers. And if you take each one of our fingers, okay, it has the terminal points for the Chinese acupuncture meridian. And so if you take the information from the photonic discharge of each one of those fingers and combine it together, you can get a readout of the holographic biofield. Okay. And this program even gives you a readout on what it says at the chakras. And it's still, I'm still wanting to do a lot more research with this in order to really, validate this. But this device has been around for over 15 years. And when Akil and Manisha were doing telepathy experiments, Akil's chakras went from being over on the left side to like 2.5 standards of deviation away on the right side. Okay. And it wasn't all of the chakras, it was just 2 of them. And one of them was the third eye chakra and the other was the throat chakra. And so it made me think of it as in terms of how I see it is that a lot of it is about that we can shift our conscious awareness to different parts of our field. We're most aware of shifting our attention to some different part of our body. I mean, if you've ever taken, a relaxation course, it's like, oh, can you focus on, this muscle and see if you can relax it and then move it up your body, and you're having to think about putting your consciousness there. And I think that a lot of these people that are really skilled, they're putting their consciousness somewhere that's not there, that's embodied. They're putting it somewhere out here. And it's giving them perception to information that is, as I said, I think contained in a field. And I think that field is in resonance with other fields and that we live in this fractal reality where you're going to have different if you're at the same point in the fractal, you can easily bridge that gap to be in resonance with another part of the fractal or a fractal like yours. Any other questions? Yeah, somebody in the back.
So, as you say, the inner world and outer world, that's separated and included. What do you see as the implications for, say, the world peace if that becomes a widespread concept?
I think so. I think so. If you look at I was talking about Claude Swanson's work, and he was talking about left-handed versus right-handed torsion. And he was talking about how right-handed torsion. He not only talked about it as being, associated with the left hemisphere, he talked about it as being associated with entropy. Okay, so movement towards disorder. And he said that the other torsion force is associated with negentropy, which is movement towards more order. And I think that a lot of why we are in the problems that we're in now today is that we have had a dominance of this left hemisphere thinking and all of the things that are represented by, that sort of more destructive, more power, and control over rather than nurturing and supporting. One's life destroying and the other is life supporting. And so I think we've been so out of balance. And what's happening is things are starting to shift. And things are starting to shift so that we're seeing more and more of this other torsion force kicking in, and more people are experiencing Kundalini rising and experiencing a shift in their consciousness because we're starting to reestablish a better balance. We're starting to move in that direction. And it's one that's more loving. It's one that's not hierarchical. It's one that will honor the interconnectedness of all of us and be less self-serving and more service to others. And so I think that we're starting to see that shift. And believe me, it can't happen fast enough for me. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people have heard the telepathy tapes. You know how phenomenal these kids are. And I felt tonight that what I wanted to really do was help you to understand how I, as a scientist, I'm not just looking at the phenomenon and going, oh, that's interesting. I'm really trying to see what is it telling us about the nature of reality, the nature of our of information, of how our consciousness relates to, we think of this physical reality is separate from us, but it can't be separate from us if we are interacting with it in the way that quantum mechanics says, where we can shift whether something light is perceived as a particle or as a wave, depending upon how it's measured. I mean, our consciousness is interacting with that. I've seen this as being a psychotherapist, how what people's mindset affects how things tend to go. I even test this out myself. And so we tend to think of these things as being separate, but they're really not so separate. And I think that the sooner we realize that, the more empowered we are, and the more we can start manifesting a world that's more the world that we would like to see.
So we can have one more question maybe in here, and then we'll go to a question from the chat. I think there's a question from Stephen at the back.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Talk loud, Stephen. Yeah.
So my question is that, based on my experience so far, it seems like people are more convinced of the underlying message that you're kind of referring to from the tapes and other experience, that you really have to have personal experience with these phenomena in order to learn. And it's actually much harder to learn from them based on studying statistics or looking at data or whatever. And I'm wondering, going forward, do you feel like maybe we need to approach to get more people involved in experience these awakening and the scientific materialism? Like, do you feel like there's maybe other approaches that we should think about? Maybe, let's just say, for example, maybe some kind of school that teaches telepathy, mind science, telekinesis, electrokinesis, and all the other side abilities that we haven't even talked about.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what I want to do. I'm really interested in people having these firsthand experiences, and oftentimes, it helps if you witness it. And then after you've witnessed it, you really believe in it, because belief plays a huge role in your ability to do these things. If you really don't believe they're possible, you're less likely to experience them. And we know that. That's a known parapsychological effect. Similar, in some ways to the placebo effect and the nocebo effect. It's just that belief plays a huge role in what we experience. And so the first thing is getting people to believe in it and witnessing it. And then I think it's a capacity that we all have to, we all have that capacity. The question is how, what all is it going to take to activate it within us?
Great. And then Dr. Hennacy, we have one comment and question in the chat here. It says, a fantastic lecture and fascinated with the differences in the brain. It suggests to me the brain could merely be the receiver and transceiver. And so could the pineal gland be the decoder?
I think the pineal gland is a big part of the decoding system. I think that's what we're doing, is we're decoding information contained in fields. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And it's really, the analogy I had is that our brain is more like our smartphone device, and the information's in the cloud. And it's about, how do we hack, our system so that we can access that information. We know that there were some really, really gifted remote viewers who are able to be given the geophysical coordinates, this many degrees north, this many degrees west, and then draw what was located there. Well, so we have, and I mentioned that GPS system that we have. Okay, so one of the things that's interesting is an area of the brain that is more active, that in this one study that was done, this area of the brain that was more active was the right hippocampus. And that's very close to where that GPS system is. And so I believe that the hippocampus, which is also involved in memory, I believe the hippocampus is intimately involved in our navigation of not just physical space, but mental space. So it's what helps to orient us within that informational field. But you still have the sensory organ for that sixth sense, which I believe is in the ventricles and the complement of the ventricles.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hennessy. Thank you.